Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, we've kept the podcast plugged in since last week so we can pick up right where we left off. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I'm always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. You know, on Tuesday, I was talking about Lost, watching Lost.
Yep.
And I'm still doing that.
Still doing your abbreviated.
Right. Yes, and I'm right at the end, and I'm at episode. I'm at episode 23 of season one.
Okay, great.
And I realized that it's one of those 2-part episodes that we talked about.
Right.
Which means there must have been 24 episodes.
Yeah.
In the first season of the show.
Yes.
And everything I said on Tuesday is still true. It's a great even when the plot isn't advancing that much, it's still a great
pleasure
hang.
to be with these people, yes.
But
and on this island, frankly.
on this island.
Right.
But sometimes, you're like, folks, we got to move this along. Like, Shannon's got a gun for some reason.
Right.
And you're like, well, we really could have done without that.
Here's the thing. Shannon's not much longer for this world.
Yeah, no, that's true.
She goes out
Spoiler for season 2 of Lost.
Yeah, I think she goes out in episode 6. Yeah. She goes out right before the episode that does the flashback for the tailies.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I mean she's not long for this world. Yes.
Yeah. It is interesting that the things that and I can talk freely about Lost, right?
Sure.
The things they introduce, the things they introduce, like the Dharma Initiative.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, this makes a ton of sense because it gives them stuff to do on the island.
Right. Yes. Well, yes.
Because they
absolutely.
very quickly run out of things.
Run out of survival-y things.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much of the early run of that show. It's impressive that someone gets hurt, Locke starts the series getting that kind of gash over his eye, and you kind of watch it slowly heal over the course of
it is really cool.
It's incredible, and the sort of continuity of their clothes and stuff like that that they have to abandon eventually because it's cool, but the novelty of it wears off.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, let's pull back from the Lost talk because I feel like
we can't just keep doing
this. It'd be too much.
Right,
it'd be too much.
Okay, instead of Lost Talk, we'll talk about Patreon instead. Patreon.com/Nintendo Cartridge Society if you would like to support us. At the 8 or 16-bit levels, you will get access to our once-a-month episodes of miniseries. We are doing, and we are continuing to do, NCS Arcade, wherein Mark and I play games on Nintendo Switch Online that we've never beaten before.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be playing Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, as voted on by you, the listeners.
Voted on this.
That was just recently added to the Game Boy on Nintendo Switch Online. And we'll be talking about it really soon.
Yeah, I believe this weekend. And then we are going to be doing a little bit of a follow-up with your emails. So if you have any thoughts about either Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge for Game Boy or any of the Game Boy Mega Man games or really any of the 8-bit Mega Man games.
Yeah, let's just make it a celebration of
open it
Mega
up,
Man.
Right? Email us, Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com, and we will incorporate your questions, your comments, your memories into that feedback episode. We need a name for those.
We do, yeah. Also, if you have accusations, I don't know why I just thought of that. You were listing things that could be in an email.
Right.
And I was like, accusations.
If you have accusations, affirmations about Mega Man.
About Mega Man.
then you can just
send them over.
Send them on over. And those that episode where we incorporate those emails will be free for everyone who follows us on Patreon.
So you should go over to Patreon and follow us, even if
it's at a free rate.
Exactly,
yes.
Yeah. You get something for doing that.
And if you are following us at the 4-bit level, you also get access to our first miniseries, which is the NCS Detective Club, where we talk about the great detective shows on television. Thank you to our new patron, Alex Solano, and to all of our patrons. We appreciate you all very much. You should be in the Discord. If you are not, email us. Again, it's Nintendo Cartridge Society
at gmail.com.
And I will send you an invitation. It is a good time talking about stuff. Don't forget, I've got my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sourcebook out in comic book stores now. Issue 4 comes out on September 4th, so the cutoff date for pre-ordering that is probably coming up pretty soon if you want to get the floppy version. Otherwise, the collection will come out early next year. All right, Mark, are you ready to conclude our ABCs of the NES?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I feel like we laid a lot of good groundwork last week.
Oh, for sure. Great episode.
B, yeah. Phenomenal episode. Go back and listen to it if you haven't. We're going to be picking up at N here, geographically halfway through the alphabet. Geographically?
I love it. Yeah, no.
Geometrically?
No regrets. We're looking forward.
Algebraically?
Barreling right
halfway
through
the alphabet. It's just halfway through the alphabet.
Yep.
So, I mean, should we just jump in with our N's?
Yeah. Go ahead. I would love you to start.
Thank you. So, we have to be a little bit careful with N because there is a big thing within the world of Nintendo that we cannot talk about anymore.
Right.
Due to the episode where hobby horses, some of them were outlawed. But I can talk about Nintendo Power, which for me...
This is also my end.
This is also your end, yes. Because we cannot talk about one of the characters that appears within Nintendo Power. We must speak on the magazine itself. Nintendo Power, first published in July or August, kind of unclear, 1988 with a Super Mario Bros. 2 cover, and then was just... the best Nintendo propaganda rag you could pick up. I had a subscription to this pretty early, not within like the first year, or maybe it was like within the first year, but like probably by middle of 89, I was getting issues of this. But I mean, I loved this thing.
Do you remember, did you have to subscribe to it? Like, did you pay money to get a Nintendo Power subscription?
My parents did.
Okay, but that's what I was wondering. Like, do you remember how you learned about Nintendo Power?
I probably saw it at a friend's house. If I had to guess, I probably saw it at Hannah's house. Because I think I remember them having at least the issue with Simon Belmont on the cover, like the really scary, like a human in a knight costume.
He's
holding a Dracula head,
or is it Medusa?
I'm pretty sure it's a Dracula head.
Yeah.
It's a really scary cover, and that may have been issue 2. So I probably saw it at Hannah's house. But like a lot of my friends were subscribing to Nintendo Power. And, you know, we talk a lot about how so many of these games are like obtuse or difficult. We talked a lot about the Game Genie last week of like just ways to make these games a little bit more accessible. And the Nintendo Power, with its copious maps, and there was like a classified information section, which would give you like tips on how to like beat bosses or find warp zones.
They've kind of brought that back in Nintendo World Championships NES edition.
Absolutely. Well, and it's just sort of the thing that I like about Nintendo World Championships NES edition is I like a lot of things about it, but I like how it is celebrating these not specifically video game parts of Nintendo's recent history, or not recent history, but their history. This physical event that took place, or like the homages to the magazine features like classified information. And yeah, I mean, then there was a comic. There were a lot of comic strips actually in Nintendo Power. There's one that we can't say the name of because we can't talk about it. And then, but like I remember they would do like the little features where they had the Super Mario Brothers 3 like manga in there for a little bit, and then another one where there was like a Link to the Past comic in there, and then of course all of the like player guides that were like entire volumes committed to a single game. Nintendo Power was like a constant companion for me with my NES.
Yeah, so I didn't have a Nintendo Power subscription. In fact, I don't know if I've ever had a Nintendo Power subscription, but the time that I was reading it, was towards the end of its life. Like,
Mm.
I was picking up Nintendo Power um in like the early 2000s.
Right.
And like I remember around the DS era, I was reading it like at the same time where I did have a subscription to EGM. Um and the thing that I feel like I really missed out on Nintendo Power, and like looking back on it, like you're talking about, oh, it has these player guides.
Yeah.
It had sections where people would write in, with like letters and stuff like that. I feel like in a lot of ways it was everything that exists on the internet crammed into a magazine because the internet didn't exist.
Absolutely.
It was, like
but
you could have discourse
yes.
with I guess slowly with other people through the letters section. You know what I mean? Like you could write in, you could have discussions about it. You were getting the player's guide. Like it was all of that. And I feel like I missed something by not having that as a kid. I think it would have been so much fun if I'd even really like knew it existed.
No, it was incredible. And I like Nintendo Power has like come back in various forms over the years. Like I think most recently is it still a podcast?
I think the podcast just ended last year. It's on hiatus right now.
And and the podcast, was that like an officially licensed Nintendo product?
I think it was from Nintendo of America, and it was hosted by a previous editor.
Yeah. And that was the same is true of the magazine, that like I called it a propaganda rag, and like it absolutely was being published by Nintendo to sell Nintendo games. And so like there were reviews in there for Nintendo games where like you couldn't really trust it. But like,
yeah, I do wonder what the like editorial standards of Nintendo Power, like what the separation between church and state was.
I bet there was no separation between church and state, because like the whole thing is an ad,
right?
And and like that was sort of fine, because like I wasn't actually going to it for like an honest review of anything. I was kind of just looking at it to like get excited about stuff.
Well, and didn't they, because they had so many extra copies of Dragon Warrior, that they just shipped it to every Nintendo Power subscriber at some point?
Like packed in with the magazine.
Yeah, wow.
Which is insane to consider like how big the cartridges are and everything. I say, look, Nintendo is big enough now. There are 100 million Switches in the world. Bring back the magazine. I'll subscribe.
Man, I just in Discord recently, somebody posted that they, when I was in Japan in the end of last year, they, at the Nintendo stores and maybe at other like electronic stores, they're not like the as big as magazines would be, but they do have basically like seasonal catalogs that are talking about, the big game release for that quarter or something like that, and plus some other supplementary stuff. And they have been translating them in the US, but not printing them. They're just available online.
Yeah.
And I would love if they would start printing them, and
right?
just like have them in Best Buy and GameStop, and you could just go pick one up.
I mean, I know we're describing things that like currently don't exist, and in the future will only exist less. But like, I don't know. It'd be fun.
It'd be fun
to pick up a magazine that's just about Nintendo.
I don't know if this is another one where I don't know if they're still in existence, but I think there was like because eventually Nintendo licensed Nintendo Power to the magazine publishing company Future.
Yeah.
And Future ran it for a few years. And then I think in like 2012, the Nintendo stopped licensing it, and Nintendo Power went away forever. But I think in the past 10 years, that honestly may have been longer than that, people who used to be on the staff started their own magazine called like Nintendo Force, I want to say.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's a going concern anymore either.
Is it weird that I sort of just want it to be like an unapologetically just like pro Nintendo, you know what I mean? Like I want it to have no journalistic integrity. I want it to just have like a ton of access, because look, if I want to get like a review of something that might be like more objectively looking at a Nintendo game, like I can go to a million different websites. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But if I just want like a magazine that's just like fun fluff pieces about the Nintendo stuff that's coming out, and maybe like access to developers or early screenshots of stuff, like Yeah, I want a Nintendo Power.
I'm looking it up, and Nintendo Force still does in fact exist.
Okay.
Each issue is like 84 pages of content, is what they're saying. I don't know how often they print, but I might have to look more into this because
All
this
right.
might be something right up my alley.
We may have to look into it. I like that a lot. We may become a podcast that reads a magazine. All right, so we share the same N, Nintendo Power. I'm just gonna say the name of the comic strip, Howard and Nestor. We can't talk about it.
No,
But
I think that's fair for people who haven't listened to the episode where we were banned from talking about it.
talking about one of those characters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
All right. So then moving on to O, would you like to go first?
Sure. My O is for 1-up. And this comes from, playing the Super Mario Brothers games, especially, the probably all of them. You get a 1-up mushroom or like a power-up mushroom, whatever they call them, 1-up mushroom.
Yeah, they're 1-up mushrooms.
And a little 1-up appears, like the word 1-up
Yes.
appears. And
Isn't it printed on the mushroom in Super Mario Brothers 2? I feel like the word 1-up is on the actual graphic of the mushroom that you pick up.
do you mean Super Mario? No,
USA.
In USA, they're like you don't earn lives from because mushrooms
Is there not a 1-up mushroom in
Super Mario Brothers 2?
I'm looking it up.
Okay. Because I want to say no, because the mushrooms are when you throw the potion and go through the door.
Right, that you get you pull up the coins and then you can earn the extra lives that way.
Oh, but are you saying in the what do you call it? That's not roulette. Slots game.
the
In
slot
the slots game.
slot machine.
Oh, maybe.
Okay, here, look. Okay, for whatever reason, it's hard to find. But so like you see above Peach's head here, there's like a little mushroom.
Oh,
that says
yeah.
1-up. Yeah, like when you pluck it out, it's a little mushroom and it says like 1-up printed on like
Yeah.
the head of the mushroom.
You're right, of course. So the 1-up is just what we called them. We didn't call them, like 1-up mushrooms or anything like that. It was like, grab that 1-up. Did you get that 1-up?
Right.
That 1-up is over there.
Sometimes extra lives or extra guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
extra guys. We did
Yeah.
call it extra guys. But it's only as an adult, as I've put away childish things, that I've learned to call it extra lives.
And we're still talking about resubscribing to the new version of Nintendo Power, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but 1-up, that was just the shorthand for extra lives in my childhood.
Yeah, and seemingly, I wonder what do you think is the first occurrence of 1-up in a game? Because what an odd way to express that, right?
Right.
1-up.
1-up what?
Well, yeah, exactly. And also, just like that's just not a way we express anything. Like +1 lives,
Uh-huh.
+1 life, like that makes sense. But 1-up, I don't know.
I don't know.
I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Don't know what it means. Don't know when it first appeared. That's a great O, Mark. My O is bad. I felt pretty good about all my entries for every other letter here, but I struggled with O. So I landed on Ocean Software, which is a developer and publisher of some of the dumbest licensed games on the NES, including the Addams Family, Cool World, and Jurassic Park. They also just published the sequel to Addams Family, which is called Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt, Dark Man, and Lethal Weapon, all for the NES.
Whoa.
Yeah, like stinker after stinker. But yeah, so that's and I've never played the NES Jurassic Park game, but it's probably in that collection that just came out recently.
Oh,
right?
yeah, probably.
Yeah, it is weird that like all of these publishing and development labels kind of like popped up at the time of the NES because the thing was so popular that there were all these different avenues for like releasing games that people could actually buy and play.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's good.
Ocean Software.
Yeah.
I struggled with this one.
No, I think that's good. I mean, if nothing else, it reminded me that Cool World exists.
Just as a concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weird to believe that it was an NES game as well. So now P. My P, Mark, I could not resist. It's got to be the Power Glove.
Oh, that's so bad.
It's so bad. We are, of course, referring to the Power Gloves appearance in the movie The Wizard, where like the bad kid Lucas, that's right, is showing it off to his competition, Fred Savage, and his brother, Aunt Jenny Lewis, for some reason. And man, the Power Glove was such a bizarre peripheral controller for the NES. It was manufactured by Mattel in North America, and by a company called PAX in Japan. And it was officially licensed Nintendo peripheral, but not made by Nintendo. And what it was the plastic kind of rubbery gray glove with a ton of buttons on it that are on like the sort of gauntlet part that would like go over your forearm. And it could theoretically be used as a controller just by like moving your hand and fingers around. But they only ever made 2 games that were like expressly compatible with it. The Super Glove Ball, which again, wild, published by Mattel, developed by Rare, with a score by David Weiss.
No way.
Yes. Do you want to hear a little Super Glove Ball music?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the man lays down a groove.
That's
right?
good.
Like it's pretty good. But the game itself is awful. Like it barely works. Oh, the other game that was made exclusively like to function with it, or specifically you could play it with a controller too, is a game called Bad Street Brawler, where you're just kind of like fighting guys in the street. Doesn't really look like it. Like the functionality with the Power Glove doesn't seem like all that special. But there you have it. And then there were like a handful of like driving games you could also play with it.
Could you not play every game with it?
You could
as
play
like a replacement for button.
So here's the thing. There were so many buttons on the controller itself, including a D-pad, like on the sort of like gauntlet part of it. So you could play any game because you had all the buttons.
Oh.
But like you couldn't really just like do a gesture to like move to the left, move to the right, or whatever. Or like to press A or press B. Like these were all specific context sensitive things for like the games that worked with it.
Got it. So it'd be like I'm just imagining, like a Fallout Pip-Boy, and you're basically just like noodling
right.
on that all day.
Yeah. Over 1 million Power Gloves were sold, if you can believe that.
Whoa.
And like it was considered like a commercial success at the time, even though like no one has any fond memories of doing anything with the Power Glove.
Yeah, I really feel like it's cameo in The Wizard.
Yeah, that's right.
What it's most remembered for. The Gaming Historian on YouTube has a great documentary about the Power Glove.
Power Glove,
the development of it.
I mean, there are a couple of these during the NES era, but just like one of those classic Nintendo follies where it's like, I can't believe you like thought people would commit this much to having like this other chunk of plastic in their house that they pay for to play 2 games that are no good.
Well, I mean, hey, 1 million people did.
1 million people did. Riding high off the power pad or whatever. But all right, Mark, what is your P?
My P is kind of related to Nintendo Power. It's the Nintendo Power line. And this was a telephone number that was advertised like on the back of NES games and all over the place.
Yes.
It was like a toll, what would you call that? Like
no, it was a 900 number.
Yeah, it was like a 1-900 number, which meant you called it and you were charged for the minutes that were.
This is such a great point, and something that I was just like, duh, it's a 900 number, something that doesn't really exist now.
Yeah, so yeah, you would like a 1-800 number free,
right?
A 1-900 number, you were charged by the minute.
Yes.
So how long you were on the phone call, you would be charged for it.
And it would just be charged directly to like the phone bill.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but what this was is you would call the number and there would be experts. There would be people sitting in like an office park in Washington near Seattle.
Right. They called them game counselors.
And you would call and you could ask them questions about, hey, I'm stuck in this game, in this level, I don't know what to do, or how do I beat this boss?
Right.
And their job was to coach you through it.
Right. And, depending on like what era you were calling in, they either had like, I know at some point they had like a robust computer like database, but there was a time when they were just flipping through binders with like issues of Nintendo Power glued into them or whatever. Like it's kind of a remarkable operation that they had. And like crazy to think that there was a time when there were few enough Nintendo games, few enough NES games that a counselor could reasonably expected to know all of the games. It's crazy stuff, right?
I also, I love that it exists. I was never able to call.
Yeah, me neither.
I also love. I looked it up. It closed in 2010. They had it going
That's so
until
late.
2010. So pretty incredible. Just a different era. But I love, you just imagine. I mean, first of all, what a dream job. You're in college or something.
Yeah, sure.
To like just do a shift,
Right.
where 8-year-old boys and girls are calling you up trying to figure out how to beat Fester's Quest.
Right.
Like you're living the dream. That's pretty good.
So okay, but that could also be very frustrating. A and B, like what happens when like a 50-year-old man calls and they're like, "I'm stuck on Zelda," and he wants to like get in a fight with you. I guess you can always hang up.
I mean, I am imagining that there's probably a certain amount of because you can't see their screen, so
Sure.
it's a lot of like trying to help other people with their computer problems over the phone.
Right.
Where you're like, okay, well, I can't exactly remember what the menu says, but I think if you click here, is there something,
Yes.
And
right.
so you're having like an 8-year-old kid trying to explain to you where they are in The Legend of Zelda.
Right. Well, and also, like, what if it just comes down to, like, okay, so you've got to double jump over that. And they're like, I don't know how to do that. You're like, all right, is your older brother there? Does he know how to double jump?
Trying to walk somebody through Metroid.
Impossible. What does the room look like?
Yeah.
The background is black and the blocks are blue.
And it's repeating.
Yes. I cannot help you.
But yeah, the Nintendo Power line.
Very cool.
So that brings us to Q.
Does.
And my Q is for quality, specifically the Nintendo seal of quality.
Mark, it's mine as well.
So, one of the things that was a problem for the Famicom in Japan was the Famicom became very successful, and so there was a flood of software for it. And at the time in Japan, Nintendo wasn't controlling like third parties being able to publish. There was no like licensing or anything like that.
It's a little bit like the Switch eShop now.
Well, except Nintendo has to, review and approve each of those.
Sure, but there are like hentai games that get on the
right,
eShop
yeah.
now.
Yeah. So imagine that, but with like zero quality control.
Right.
So all of these publishers and developers are publishing games for the Famicom, and similar to what happened in the US with the video game crash, is that a lot of them were really bad, and so people began to associate that negatively with Nintendo, and so Nintendo combated that in Japan with the Nintendo or the Famicom Disk System, which had like an the games had to be approved and like reviewed and published by Nintendo, and the way they did that like was in the disc itself.
Right.
There was like something that read Nintendo, and it had to fit into that groove.
It's like the little groove.
Put the disc in. In the US, the way that they did that is they created a official licensing program. So and Nintendo controlled the manufacturing of all of the cartridges.
Yeah, and there was a special lockout chip called 10NES that would like literally stop games that didn't have it from being played on the NES. People would eventually find workarounds to publish games that didn't include this chip, but it was effective for a while.
And so all games that to be published for the NES had to go through Nintendo, had to be, presumably reviewed by Nintendo, but they had to show that they were officially like Nintendo licensed games or products. They had this little seal on it, the official Nintendo seal of quality.
It's like a nice little gold seal. It says Nintendo seal of quality on it. And there is something heartwarming about seeing it, where you're like, yes, I'm. Even though like you could probably still be playing a bad game, but like you could be reasonably well assured that it would work.
Well, and the seal still exists in some form today. It's
Sure.
still on all officially licensed Nintendo products or products from Nintendo itself, but now it's just the official Nintendo seal.
Oh, it no
No
longer
guarantee-
claims quality.
Right. And so in like game manuals, there would be kind of an explanation for what the seal is. The seal itself in it would say, "This seal is your assurance that Nintendo has approved and guaranteed the quality of this product." And it really wasn't meant because there were a lot of bad games for the NES. So
Sure.
it really wasn't meant as like, this game is good.
We might talk about a couple of them. So.
Yeah. It wasn't meant that this game is good. It really just meant this game will work in an NES and isn't going to harm your NES or do any
Yeah.
But in game manuals there'd be a blurb kind of like talking it up, and it says, "Look for this seal on all software and accessories for your Nintendo Entertainment System. It represents Nintendo's commitment to bringing you only the highest quality products. Items not carrying this seal have not been approved by Nintendo and are not guaranteed to meet our standards of excellence in workmanship, reliability, and most of all, entertainment value."
Pretty good statement there. It is. It's fascinating how much, and we'll talk about it actually a little bit more later in this list. How much Nintendo was doing to throttle the release of like superfluous software on NES. It was just the most popular thing going, right? It was ubiquitous. We talked about it last week, but like Nintendo was synonymous with video game system, right? And when someone said like play video games, they meant play the NES. Like the seal of quality is just like one way that they were trying to stop an unending flow of software that people would get like burnt out on.
Yep.
Really gun shy from the whole like ET debacle.
Yeah, totally.
Which it is. There must have been other contributing factors, right? Just that there were like a ton of games coming out. It wasn't just that ET was terrible and they made like 20 million copies of it.
No, I think ET is like, pointed to as the when it jumped the shark.
Yeah.
Or like the one act of hubris that
Right.
The straw that broke the camel's back.
Right. That like the industry was already in a tailspin and they were betting big on ET and it was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, Q is for quality for me as well, which means I will do my R next. And my R is for Rad Racer. Mark, are you familiar with Rad Racer?
Only a name.
Rad Racer is a car racing game developed by Square and published by them in Japan, but published by Nintendo in North America. And it looks pretty similar to like Mach Rider and like other sort of driving games at the time, where like your perspective is behind the car and it's got like a faux 3D thing going on. And you race from theoretically anyway, from the West Coast to the East Coast. But there's also like Athens is a level as well. So it's unclear to me exactly how how the mythology of that works. But like it's pretty impressive looking in its like presentation of this like pretend 3D space. The road, much like in Mach Rider, you'll see it like curve off into the distance, either like left or right, and then that you have turns coming up. But it'll also do a thing where like the horizon line like raises and lowers to sort of give you the impression that you're going uphill or downhill. Very like cool in that a little bit of presentation. But the thing that is a couple things that are fascinating about Rad Racer is that if you push the select button, it would go into 3D mode. Now, Mark, 3D mode meant that you had to put on your red and blue 3D glasses.
Whoa.
And it like had a separate graphic display that was like red and blue 3D. So you could play the game in crappy 3D, at least in North America. In Japan, there was, are you familiar with the Famicom 3D system?
No.
It's like a set of LCD glasses that you like strap to your face that like displayed stereoscopic 3D by having like the two screens like on these glasses and hooked up to your Famicom. And Rad Racer had 3D mode via this amazing Famicom 3D system.
Oh, wow.
That you could strap to your head and play this game. In Japan, the game was called Highway Star, but it's the same game. And there were only 7 other games that were ever compatible with the Famicom 3D system. I'd never heard of any of them. But I'd also never heard of that piece of hardware before. Just a strange little relic. Rad Racer, despite being published by Nintendo in North America, has never been re-released on Virtual Console or Nintendo Switch Online. And like it came out in the like using the graphic stylings of the Black Box series of games, right? We talked about Black Box last week, where it's like pixel graphics from the game and then like, you know, sort of like a uniform presentation of like the title against like a black backdrop. It wasn't an actual black box. It's more silver, like Metroid and Kid Icarus are. But I think those are the only 3 that are silver like that. And it was the last game to be released using that format.
Whoa.
For packaging. So weird for a number of reasons, right? Rad Racer.
That's really cool. No, I had heard of Rad Racer, but I did not know really any of that about it.
Yeah, it's a strange game, and I know I've played it before. And I am also certain that when I turned on Mach Rider when it recently came to the NES, that I was like, that I had Rad Racer in my head, and was like, oh no, I don't want to play this. I want to play Rad Racer.
That's a great one. My R is for Rare, the game development company.
Yeah.
Probably best
developers of Super Glove Ball.
Yeah. Developers of Jet Force Gemini for the Nintendo 64, and really like so. Rare has really became aware of them as a kid during the Donkey Kong Country era.
Sure.
And seeing that Rare logo as part of the title screens for that. And of course, in the Nintendo 64 era, they were a huge contributor to the Nintendo 64 and to Nintendo's like efforts there with GoldenEye, Diddy Kong Racing, Donkey Kong 64, the Banjo-Kazooie series, just a ton
Conker's
of games.
Bad Fur Day.
Perfect Dark.
Blast Core.
Really, yeah, you could go on. They published so many games. They were so prolific on the Nintendo 64. But
they were also prolific on the NES, and in like the pre-NES era, just like they just put out games.
Yeah, they and I didn't realize this, but they had a relationship with Nintendo really early because the like company that preceded it made games for the Spectrum ZX, or like it's a home computer in Europe and maybe elsewhere. But so they were publishing games for that. But then when they saw Famicom, they were like, "Oh, that's
what we need to be.
This is what we need to be doing."
Yeah.
And so they basically like created a new company and started reverse engineering the Famicom, which at the time Nintendo was saying like could not be done.
Right.
And then so after they had done all this work, they were able to get a meeting with a Nintendo executive in Kyoto who was apparently so impressed that gave them a very large budget to start creating Famicom games. But not only did they make Nintendo, so I didn't realize the relationship with Nintendo went back that far, like Nintendo directly.
Yes.
Because they also, made games for so many different other publishers, like Acclaim, Electronic Arts, in the NES era as well. Like they were all over the place. Prolific. They were just like so prolific.
Made a game for Mattel.
So yeah, Rare. And now they're owned by Microsoft like in the early 2000s. Nintendo, the founders were looking to sell. Nintendo had the opportunity. Nintendo had a minority stake in Rare, and had the opportunity to buy the whole thing, decided against it. Microsoft, which was, they were getting ready, they were launching their own consoles, bought Rare up.
This is back when they had nothing, basically. Yeah.
And the company is still
Bungie,
around today making stuff, but I think it's probably best known, best loved for its work during the Super Nintendo and N64 era.
So that is definitely true, but like there were a lot. So Anticipation is a board game on NES that's made by Rare that I love. It's like a connect the dots. You have to like type in the what the object is that they're drawing.
Battletoads,
of course, a huge one for me. And a handful of games have been coming to the Nintendo Switch Online, including like Snake Rattle and Roll, Cobra Triangle, RC Pro-Am. Like They made a lot of cool games.
Yeah.
For NES.
I'm looking on Wikipedia, and it's like between 1986 and we'll just say 1991, they were responsible for like more than 50 games.
Yeah, which is astounding, and like the fact that they were working on like Famicom infrastructure like early, or like working with it early to like reverse engineer it, I think shows in their games, right? Like they present games that are almost always like bigger than you expect an NES game to be, more varied than you expect an game to be. Battletoads is 12 levels, and each level is like a totally different game style, with like crazy different graphics. Like they're just a huge game, and that's even true of the Cobra Triangle and like those other games that just came to Nintendo Switch Online. They feel more advanced than an NES game should. They're not always fun for that advancement, but they do always seem like
Pushing the state of the art.
Absolutely. All right. Good R for Rare. Mark your S.
My S is for shortages, specifically the 1988 chip shortages. But this was a time where, again, there was a microprocessor shortage in the world, and this caused problems for Nintendo because Nintendo was the bottleneck. Nintendo had to manufacture every NES cart.
Yes.
And so if there were third-party publishers, that were trying to get their orders in through Nintendo, Nintendo had its own games. It ended up delaying like Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and Super Mario Brothers 2 were supposed to come out earlier in 1988. Zelda 2 didn't make it until the very end of the year, and even then it was impossible to get until into 1989.
So it's always been this way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I thought was interesting is that the shortages were so bad that Nintendo ended up like not publishing. They stopped making like 17 of their own games, mostly like the black box titles.
Yeah.
They just stopped manufacturing more of them in order to try to, including one of them that was included was Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
They just stopped manufacturing new carts of it because they had to get other new stuff out.
Well, that, and they were putting out carts that were Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt and Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt and World Class Track Meet.
Yeah, because they also stopped like manufacturing Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. as their own, because they ended up like doing a combined cartridge and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Donkey Kong 3, I think they just stopped manufacturing.
It's a shame. Big boosters of Donkey Kong 3 here. It saw no justice. Shortages is a great one, and like a nice reminder that like 30 years later, like the same problems persisted again. My S is the super part of Super Mario Brothers. Mario Brothers obviously was a game that existed before this sort of like single screen 2-player thing where you're bopping bad guys from underneath and then kind of like looping back around to kick them off the ledge. That game is fine, right? Feels more like a Donkey Kong game than it does a Mario game, right? And it's not really until Super Mario Brothers that like it becomes apparent that like Nintendo and Miyamoto and Mario are all capable of like something revolutionary and huge, right? And this super branding obviously catches on 6 years later when the Super NES comes out. And then every game gets tagged with Super whatever, Super Metroids, Super Contra, Super Castlevania. Everything becomes Super. Ghouls and Ghosts. But this is Nintendo sort of calling their shot, right? Being like, no, the plus-up version, the like marquee version of the thing that we do is Super Mario Brothers. And it just seems like an important part of their branding that like, how is that what you land on? Like from Mario Brothers to this new game that like is so much more sprawling and so much more epic. Why is it Super that they land on?
Yeah, that would be really interesting to know the genesis of that. Like what marketing person either in Japan or the US came up with that. And, they did their job for the day somebody was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. We're gonna run with that. It's Super Mario Brothers. That's how we're differentiated from the arcade game that people
Right.
already know." And then to have that become the branding for so
Right.
many years
Well,
is just really impressive.
and like the Mario branding forever.
Yeah, Super Mario Galaxy, Super Mario Odyssey,
Super
like
Mario Brothers Wonder, like
uh-huh.
the most recent game in the series, has Super at the front of it. And like at this point, we don't need it, right? Like it doesn't need to be Super Mario Sunshine, but it is.
Yeah, it's just part of the brand.
It's just part of the brand.
Well,
And
and
yeah.
also it like differentiates it from, you have like Mario Tennis or Mario Party.
But we now
Occasionally you
also have
get
Super
yeah,
Mario
occasionally
Party.
you
Yeah.
get like a Super Mario Party, but for the most part it's like, oh no, the Super Mario series
Right.
is something different from just
Right.
Mario.
And like I know that when he's big, he's Super Mario, right? Like that's
Right.
his actual, and just is normal Mario when he's small. But yeah, I don't know. Just however, because it could have been like Mega Mario Brothers or
Mhm.
like Giant Mario Brothers or like who even knows. But no, they landed on Super, and that is now like a part of, like, no other video game can call itself Super something. I guess Monkey Ball does. But I'm saying there's an association, right?
Right.
That as soon as a video game is labeled as Super something, you're like, oh, that's probably Mario and probably Nintendo as well.
Mhm.
So that's my S, is the Super in Super Mario Brothers. My T, I got to be true to myself. Of course, it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which there were 3 Turtles games on the NES. That like weird one that's like a hybrid overhead and like side scrolling thing. The port of the arcade game, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, the Manhattan Project, and then of course the fighting game that came later, the TMNT Tournament Fighters. Not many one-on-one fighters on the NES, although we may be talking about another one coming up soon. Who knows? But yeah, like the Turtles quickly, being a comic that came out in 1984, and sort of like riding the wave of popularity throughout the rest of the 80s with the animated show that launched in 87. I think the first Turtles game comes out in 88, and the arcade game comes out in like 89. That like it's just all of this moment and riding this very specific like wave of Turtle mania that peters out by like 1992. But like all these games come out like in that pocket, and they're just like fun, cool games that I don't know. It makes the Turtles, to me, feel like not just comic characters, but like I don't know. They seem like valid entries in like video game characters, and I think that's owed largely to those 3 NES games.
Developed by Konami, right?
Yes, correct.
Imagine being like a 30-year-old game developer in Japan,
Right.
given this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles license,
Yeah.
and being told to make a game out of it, and you're like, wait, what is this?
Yeah. Tell me,
They're turtles?
They're ninjas.
And they're teenagers?
Right. And like, oh, and the finer points of the Daredevil parody have been totally buried.
And they like pizza.
And they like pizza. They love pizza. They fight a man who has knives all over his body.
All right, we can make a game out of
We
this.
can make a game out of that.
And the soundtrack's going to be great.
Yes. And these games are all collected recently on the Cowabunga collection, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the only way anyone will ever beat the first Ninja Turtles game. It's so hard. But yeah, I mean, I love all 3 of those games, and I tolerate the fighting game.
You're on warning, fighting game.
You're on warning, Tournament Fighters.
The
NES
which could also
version.
be your T.
What's that?
It could have been your T. Tournament Fighters.
Oh yeah, true.
Just naming things with T's.
Sure.
Here's another one. Toy. That's my T. So
Yes.
Nintendo, lots of meanings this could have. I'm talking like Yoda now. The Nintendo started as a toy company. Well, started as like a card company,
Right.
but has manufactured toys for so much of its existence.
The Ultra Hand, the Ultra Machine, others.
Yeah. But also when the NES was brought to America, because there was the video game crash, a lot of retailers were hesitant to stock a new video game console. They're like, nobody wants that. So Nintendo went out of their way, like we talked about a little bit last week, to present this thing as not a video game console.
It's an entertainment system.
It's basically
it entertains you.
It's basically a fancy toy. Look, you got Rob the Robot here.
Rob the Robot is a big part of what made the suggestion that it was a toy possible, because they were selling it with a pack-in toy. Right? Like, the robot is a physical toy.
Yeah. And another one where it, really is like the Trojan horse. They're like, well, here's Rob the Robot that we developed like 1.5 games for, honestly.
Yeah.
And
it's
we're
crazy.
never going to do this ever again.
Because it's, can we even name them both? Gyromite is one.
Uh-huh.
What's the other one?
And, the other one is... I honestly can't remember.
Yeah, me neither.
But yeah, so that's like the Trojan horse that got Nintendo Entertainment System consoles stocked in the beginning. Was like, it does it all. It's a computer. It's a toy. It's a family entertainment machine.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna learn this right now. Okay, so the two games are Gyromite and Stack Up.
Stack Up.
And Rob, of course, stands for Robotic Operating Buddy.
He's your friend.
Yeah. Remember when we had his cousin Navcom on the show?
I do. Yeah.
That was good. The whole toy thing is so interesting, and like it feels like it is reflected in how they treat their hardware going forward, right? That like everything has a little bit of like a toy quality to it. Nintendo's never going to put out a system that like looks like an Xbox. You know what I mean? Where it's just like, it just gets the job done. It's always going to be an object that in and of itself like sparks joy.
Yeah, it's just, it is just in Nintendo's DNA.
Yes.
That it is a toy like entertainment company.
Yes.
That just happens to make video games.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, like a Sony PlayStation or Microsoft Xbox, where they got into it to get into the video game business.
Right.
The Nintendo is opening an official museum in Kyoto sometime next year, I think. And I really want to visit someday. I'm sure they'll have a lot of very cool like video game history stuff, but I'm guessing and I'm hoping that they also have a lot of, or at least some things that are honoring its longer history, because Nintendo as a company's been around for over 100 years.
Right. Incredibly cool. Yeah, let's go to that. Let's do that. That'll be an episode of the show.
My U is for user manuals.
Okay.
A thing that
remember user manuals?
Yeah, a thing that used to exist. My feeling, and check me on this, is that the Wii era is when user manuals began to fall out of fashion.
I feel like even in the GameCube era, they're falling away, right?
Definitely the utility of a game manual changed by the GameCube era. By the GameCube era, it was mostly about like the push the A button to do this,
right? And
then here's a bunch of legal stuff,
right?
Like when you're plugging this in, don't dip the whole thing in water because it'll shock you,
right? Unlike your previous game consoles, you cannot dip this one in water. Do not use in the shower.
But in like the NES era, game manual, like the games themselves were so limited in their presentation that occasionally a Ninja Gaiden would come along that had cuts, like basically like animated like cutscenes and stuff like that. But if you wanted to know the story of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, you had to read the game manual.
Or the original Legend of Zelda.
If you wanted to know what those like pixel characters were actually supposed to be renders of, you looked in the game manual to figure out what the enemy name was called.
Because there's little drawings of all those guys in the Kid Icarus manual. They're all in there.
Yeah, and so,
and it doesn't answer your questions. You're like, so it's just like a nose and a mustache that's flying around?
So it is really fun and even now when I'm like playing a game on Nintendo Switch Online or something, I'm like, what on earth is going on?
Right.
I will sometimes look up one of the old game manuals, like somebody's posted a PDF, and reading through it, it's just a lot of fun, especially for these older, like Nintendo first party games. Now the canon is all in line and everybody knows what a Metroid is and, what the enemies in Super Mario Brothers should be called. All of that has been standardized. But back in the day, it was the Wild West.
Right.
And so it's really fun like the story for Zelda 2 is so convoluted.
Yes.
There's like a brother who has a wizard friend.
Yep.
And then like the friend's spell goes awry, and so Zelda goes to sleep. It is bonkers
it's a
and off the
jilted
wall.
lover scenario, we know.
And you should
right.
absolutely look up the game manuals. They're a lot of fun, and it is another piece of that like video game experience that I miss.
Yeah, me too. That like the physicality of that is really something special. One of a candidate for my U was going to be Urban Champion. And part of what I wanted to talk about with Urban Champion was however it decided to explain itself in the instruction booklet to be like how does it justify, because if you've never played Urban Champion, again, it is available on Nintendo Switch Online, and is a notoriously bad and boring one-on-one fighting game where you're like two dudes on the street fighting in front of like a shop, and the goal is to back the other player into, or a computer controlled player, 3 screens, and like punch them into a manhole. And every now and then a cop car will come by and both players like reset to their starting positions. But so I was like, there must be some sort of explanation for like who these people are, what's going on in their neighborhood that they have to fight each other. And there is no story information in the game manual for Urban Champion. So therefore it is not my U, but I just, you were mentioning the user manual, so I wanted to bring it up. My U, which ties back into my T, is Ultra. Ultra is the second publishing arm of Konami that they set up as like a shell company because Nintendo was expressly limiting the number of games that a third-party publisher could put out over the course of 1 year to 5. And Konami at that time put out games, which is not a thing that Konami does anymore, but there was a time where they were cooking. And so they had this second line that they called Ultra. And I know it is like fruitless to try and like divine a brand or like an attitude from the Ultra half of Ultra and Konami because it's the same company. But like just check out these games and tell me if it doesn't feel like it has more swagger and more like American attitude. Metal Gear, Skate or Die, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Snake's Revenge, Mission Impossible, Roller Games, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, Ski or Die, Base Wars, Star Trek, the 25th anniversary. It just like...
I like that or die is a series.
Yes.
It's like blank or die.
Yes.
That could be a franchise.
I mean, Skate or Die is a great game.
It's a great name, too.
Yeah, it is.
What was the other one? Ski or
Ski
Die?
or Die, yeah.
That's one a little less rad.
So it's 1991, so it's a little early for Snowboard or Die. But they should have done a Surf or Die.
It definitely, I don't know, maybe this is, it has that like California in the 80s mystique.
Yes.
I feel like.
Yeah, no, it's got that cowabunga magic. And maybe that's really what this whole like Ultra line is to me. I don't know. I mean, there's some other stuff that I skipped over, but like what a lineup of like games that are undeniably cool.
Yeah.
Right? Turtles, Skate or Ski or Die, Mission Impossible, Metal Gear, 2 of those games. I don't know. It's just Ultra meant you were getting a cool game.
Yeah, it does feel that way.
Even if they weren't always good. So then my V is a little bit of a sideways thing here. It's Virtual Console, which, you know, obviously when we're talking about Virtual Console, we're talking about the Wii, the Wii U, and the 3DS. But it's important to note that the NES games are always the first games on these services. And, you know, on the Wii, it launched with a couple different systems like right at once, as it did on the others. But the NES is always among them, right? There is no Virtual Console that doesn't include NES and include it at launch. When Nintendo Switch Online was like, here's a library, they start with NES games. And that is just, I don't know, it is evidence of how the NES is like the standard bearer for Nintendo's like retro or like their sort of like classic thing. Like that's what Nintendo puts forth via the Virtual Console is the NES library.
Yeah, I mean, I think they know that people just want to play Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3.
Yes. Yeah, just wherever they can. On whatever they're currently playing on, they want to be able to play those 3 games, maybe Zelda, maybe Metroid, and then...
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I like that. I remember, you know, the... obviously, when the Super Nintendo came out, I eventually got Super Mario Brothers All-Stars, so you could play Mario there. Right. I remember on the Game Boy Advance being able to buy, like, you know, they were releasing NES classics.
Right.
And Super Mario Brothers was one of them. And I just remember having access to those classic Nintendo games in handheld form on the Game Boy Advance, which felt like it was like a faithful recreation. That was a great experience. So yeah, any time that a new Nintendo console launches, and I don't know with the Switch 2 that we're going to have this experience where they're like, and now you can play Super Mario Brothers 3 on this new console.
No, they better just the old libraries better.
I know.
Over, right?
I think that's what I'm expecting.
Yeah.
With them talking up Nintendo accounts so much that like the existing Nintendo Switch Online libraries will continue into the future, and obviously that I prefer that. But there is something about the pomp and circumstance of a new Nintendo console getting NES games for the first time.
Yeah.
That will be missed just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
And it is amazing that they've been able to do it on like everything.
Yeah,
right?
and on the Switch it was like a good year.
Yeah.
After it released,
Like
right?
the blimp,
That Nintendo Switch Online became like a paid service.
Mhm.
And it just seems wild that you went a year without being able to play Super Mario Brothers on that system.
Yeah, that is crazy.
I mean, I think they released Versus through like Arcade Archives.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. That Hamster was putting those out. Although they waited a little bit to like get to the Nintendo arcade games, but yeah, it is possible that Versus Super Mario Brothers came out before regular old Super Mario Brothers.
My V is for video cables.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Just like with the reset button last week, just another walk down video memory lane, not video lane, where
this might be something you see on Video Lane.
There were
cables.
Two ways that you could connect an NES to your television.
Yes.
So there was the way that my memory, like we did it in my family, which was with the like AV, the RCA like AV cables,
like the two cables, one for audio, one for video.
Yeah, like red and yellow or red and white.
Right.
And so the Nintendo Entertainment System was output mono sound.
Yes.
There was no stereo, so it only had one audio output. So you would put the red and the yellow cables into the NES, and then you would plug the appropriate ones into the back of your television.
Or sometimes the front.
Or sometimes the front that lined up with it, and that's how you got audio out, and that's how you got video out.
Right. What's interesting is at the time that the NES was coming out, that was like the high-tech way of doing it, right?
Yes.
So we had older TVs in my parents' house growing up, and in particular the one that like they didn't care about, that like lived in the basement for a while and then in my room later, that did not have those inputs. So I always use the coaxial RF thing to hook up.
And I am not a scientist, so I don't entirely understand.
I am a scientist.
I don't entirely understand how it works, but basically this was like a common way to do it, like you said, with older televisions. But the like output quality in both video and sound is worse, because instead of having separate like channels,
it was all coming through.
They were like cramming it into one
Yeah.
Output. So basically the way this worked is if you have like cable internet, you have that coaxial cable.
Yeah, you probably have this even on your TV now.
Yeah, that you have to kind of like screw it into it and have it connect, and there's like a pin that goes into, and then you screw it in. Like that was the other way that you could plug your NES into a TV.
And the thing is, it had like a nub on the end of it, so you could plug like the cable from the wall like into it and like kind of daisy chain it through. And I remember just like getting excited about like having the Super NES, the NES, and then like the VCR, like all this
all
like
plugged into
cable,
one mega entertainment machine.
Yeah, it was my entertainment system. Dang it. That's interesting. I did not know that would result in worse quality.
That's what I was reading. Is that because it was sharing like that one path, for lack of a better term. See, this is where my lack of a science degree is really tripping me up. But again, like even it's just whenever we're doing this and we're talking about like video cables, it just reminds me that like the Wii era, I remember buying the more expensive composite cables, so that way
where there were like 3 video components and 2 audio.
I can't remember what the exact. I just remember them being like, it's like you should buy this because the video will look, like the graphics will
Marginally
look
better.
marginally better than if you
Yes.
use the composite cables, and that it wasn't until the Wii U
Yeah.
that there was
HDMI.
HDMI. Oh, right, on the Wii, it's like it plugged in as like a single thing,
Yes.
and then it
split.
split
Yeah.
to be able to plug in your TV. Wild.
Yep.
So crazy.
Crazy stuff, and now we're just like, no, everything's HDMI.
Yeah.
That's all we do now. So that's your V, your W.
Oh, my W. We have an episode about this of the show from early, with special guest Ryan Mogi, and we talked about it a little bit when we were talking about the Power Glove. My W is The Wizard.
The Wizard.
The 1989 film starring Fred Savage, Jenny Lewis, Beau Bridges, Christian Slater, and the little kid.
Forgot about Christian Slater.
It's a movie about troubled youth traveling the country. One of them is a video game savant.
Yes, it is strange because it definitely feels like a troubled youth 80s movie that they stapled a Nintendo commercial onto. And it is totally bizarre. It's a bizarre experience to watch this movie.
It's totally bizarre. It is a Nintendo commercial.
Yes.
Famously, the climax of the film takes place at Universal Studios Hollywood.
Mhm.
So for me,
And they go on the King Kong ride.
for me,
Right.
yeah, they're on the tram tour. They get off of the tram.
Yep.
They're running underneath and like
above it too, right? Like they're in like the catwalks.
and so you
where
can
the bad guy
you
is.
can see like the bottom of the King Kong animatronic.
Yeah.
And as a I've always loved theme parks.
Mhm.
I've always loved Nintendo. So the mashup of the two, I would just rewind this part so I could look at them. So I could look at the Kong animatronic and just see how it worked. Like I just thought that was so cool.
On our recently, Sarah, months ago now, Sarah and I went to Phoenix to watch some Cubs spring training games, and on the way back we drove by those dinosaurs.
Oh, right.
That the kid is like obsessed with, and like he associates with California.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a lot of like things in that movie that just like sparked my child brain, like Nintendo, like the theme park stuff, like the behind the scenes at the theme park, and like a big dinosaur attraction on the side of the road. Plus Fred Savage. I don't know.
Plus, lest we forget,
Yes. Yes.
The end of the movie takes place at the Nintendo World Championships, where they reveal Super Mario Brothers 3 for the first time,
Yes.
which I think was the first time
Yes,
we had seen
it
Super
was.
Mario Brothers 3 footage in the United States.
Which is outrageous, of course. And it's like the championship round. And the whole thing is based on like how many points they get.
Yeah, and it's it's the beta version, so it's the
Yeah,
first
that's
level
right.
of Super Mario Brothers 3, but it's a little bit different than
Jimmy finds the warp whistle.
Oh, that's right.
And Jenny
yeah.
Lewis knows what it is,
And-
and that he should warp to get more points.
And earlier in the movie, they call the Nintendo Power Line.
They do, yes.
So yeah, it was just pushing all my buttons.
There's also a scene where Beau Bridges and Christian Slater are staying in a hotel room, and Beau Bridges can't sleep, so he like gets the NES out of like the back of the truck or something, hooks it up to the TV, and is playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles all night long.
Oh man!
And Christian Slater is like, are you still up playing that game? And he's like, I made it to Metalhead, but he beat me and blah, blah, blah. And then Christian Slater's like, you made it to Metalhead? It's awesome. It's awesome.
There is so much in that movie, you're right, that feels like it was written as one thing.
Yes.
And then to get it produced,
Yes.
they crammed a bunch of Nintendo commercials into it.
I almost feel like it's the opposite, right? That like Nintendo was like, we need a movie, something high enough profile that we can introduce Super Mario Brothers 3. And they went to someone and were like, what scripts do you have that we can staple this onto? And they're like, this one, I guess. And they're like, great, do it. Fred Savage, Jenny Lewis, we're making this thing today.
Yeah. It is such a cultural artifact.
Yeah, not actually a good movie, but
No.
like things in it that light up my brain for sure. Yes, check out our. Did we do two? No, we just did one episode.
We just did
on that.
one of that.
We did 2 episodes on the Super Mario Brothers movie from 1993 with Ryan Mogi. One before we watched it and just what we remembered of it, and then another one reeling from what we had just seen. A great W, The Wizard. My W, I've got 2 different options here. I'm I'm going to do them both because the first one we can breeze by real quick. It's just Wario's Woods, which is the coming out in 1994, was the only NES game to be rated by the ESRB. There you go. Do you know Wario's Woods, Mark?
I know of it.
Yeah, it's like a Tetris-like game where you play as Toad running around like the bottom of the game board, moving things around to line up three of them.
I've messed around with that before. It's one where that they published on the Super Nintendo as well, right?
Yes,
And
that's
it's
right.
like one of the last. I can't remember if it is the
Zoda's
last, but
Revenge
it's
comes
like,
out later.
It's
but
one
yeah.
of the last NES games.
Yeah. And weirdly, Zoda's Revenge was not rated. Anyway, but the real W that I think we can like sink a little time and attention into here is, of course, World Class Track Meet, the game that you played with the Power Pad, which you had one of the 3-pack cartridges, right?
Yeah, it was Super Mario Brothers,
Yep.
Duck Hunt, and World Class Track Meet.
Yep. And it was just like a series of like track events you played with the Power Pad, and I was obsessed with this thing. Where it would just like I don't know why it felt so fun. Probably because it was one of the 3 games that we had at when we got the system. Like, and Mario was probably a little too hard for me at that point. And Duck Hunt gets stale fast. But like there are all these different events, and you can do hurdles and long jump and the triple jump. Yeah, it's just it's such a special little experience.
Yeah, I remember not being able to ever figure out like the events other than the sprints and the hurdles.
Oh, okay.
And so I remember doing the sprints and the hurdles with my siblings, with my cousins.
Yeah.
Like we would do that all the time. And we would, in that, you're like progressing from, you start by racing Turtle, and at the
Right.
the
It's like a cheetah.
the final racer is named Cheetah, and I remember they have little animations of them warming up and doing stretches, and we would mimic those, and then we would run the races. I have really fond memories of that part. Never being able to figure out the other ones, but yeah, that the only Power Pad game that we owned.
Yeah, I mean there was one other one that I rented at some point, but it's yeah, that's really the only one that I have real memory of. And again, just like here's another of Nintendo's follies, right? The Power Pad, the Power Glove, the Rob the Robot, like all these things where it's just like 1 or 2 games and like one of them maybe works, but like it all justifies having this thing that's in your house. Power Pad was also cool though because you could like fold it up,
Yeah,
and like just put it away. Have you ever seen the Famicom box art for World Class Track Meet?
No.
Which is also called Stadium Events, depending on where and when it was published.
Because I don't think it's a Nintendo game. I think it's a
Bandai game. That's
right.
It's just it's got 2 little guys on it who are wearing like, one of them is wearing like little red shorts, the other one's wearing little blue shorts, and it's just very, I don't know, it's funny and I like it a lot. The American art for it is legitimately bad. But so go look at the box art for World Class Track Meet and Stadium Events, published by Nintendo and Bandai. Okay, so there's that.
That's
who to now?
Now you for your X.
My X is for the NES expansion port. There's a little plug at the bottom of the NES. You flip it over and you can like pull this thing out, and there are some pins in there. Never got used in the North American version of the NES. I think the equivalent of the what's on the Famicom is how the disk system connects. I'm not sure actually. But the expansion port never turned into anything in the United States. Until earlier this year, Mark, a company called Time to Retro introduced the NES Hub as an accessory that plugs into the NES expansion port.
What does it do?
A couple things. So one is that it allows access to the audio channels that the NES did not have enough memory to run.
Oh.
So like you could hear the original soundtrack to The Legend of Zelda, which on the Famicom was using like the disk system data to, there's like a little like warbly instrument to it. So A, that. B, they have it so you can connect Bluetooth controllers to it, up to 4 of them, via this like NES hub.
That's cool.
So, a cool way to sidestep the 2 controller limit. Not that there were too many games that allowed more than 2 players, but also that you could use whatever kind of controller you want. A cool little piece of kit for an expansion port that never had any use during the NES's life cycle.
Well, a couple of weeks ago when we were perfecting NES games, we were talking about Excite Bike, and we were saying like in Japan, that port was used for all kinds of accessories, keyboards, and being able to save data to a tape deck, basically. And Nintendo teased a lot of that coming to the US, but never actually pulled the trigger.
I mean the thing was all potential gimmicks, right? A couple of them eked out, but that they never got anything out for the expansion port.
My X is for cross generation.
Okay.
And this is what
I want. Wario's Woods.
Well, what I wanted to talk about here was not specific games, but was really the fact that the Super Nintendo was not backwards compatible with NES games, which was now we more or less take it in stride, I would say. A lot of Nintendo hardware does have backwards compatibility, but occasionally they
Switch
do
was
not.
kind of the first one that didn't in a long time.
Yeah. The expectation is that the next hardware will, but it was a big enough deal that the Super Nintendo did not support NES games that it was on the news. Interviews with parents being upset because
there was so much less news then.
Yeah, it is true. Everything was slower.
News was on twice a day instead of all day long everywhere.
Yep. And so there would be interviews with parents who were upset that, hey, I put so much money into the NES, and now this new thing comes along, and there's no backwards compatibility. Being upset about that. It just another kind of like cultural moment in time that like the NES was such a big deal that it was national news when the Super Nintendo didn't support NES games.
And it's crazy how long they supported the NES after the Super NES came out, right? It was like 4 years. Like Wario's Woods came out in 1994. Like it's a long time to still be supporting the old hardware, because there are so many units out there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with Switch. It's possible that my guess is Nintendo will support the Switch for at least a year.
Yeah,
after,
maybe longer.
The next hardware comes out. But yeah, maybe even longer. My why.
Sorry, I was just contemplating like how long, because also like Nintendo's not going to. Game development takes so long, right? And it's like, at what point can you be confident where you're like, okay, Switch 2 is selling well enough that we can put out games that are exclusives and they're not going to bomb relative to how they would perform on just regular old Switch because there are so many units out there, right? Like, and so when that happens, when they finally have that data, the next game will be out like 3 years out at that point.
Yeah, no, I mean it's
minimum.
I mean, Sony and Microsoft chose to solve that problem by building cross-generation games for a number of years.
Right.
And we very well could see Nintendo follow that strategy as well, because you're right. It's like game development is so long and so expensive, but you need to encourage people to upgrade to your latest and greatest.
Right.
But at the same time, like, if you launched Tears of the Kingdom on the Switch 2,
right?
I mean, maybe it would have sold. Who knows?
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's like I agree with what you're saying. That math, that calculus. How do you figure out what that tipping point is?
It's very tricky. Yeah.
My why.
Yes.
My why is for Yoshi.
I think we should go back to that and say my why.
My why is for Yoshi, who debuted on the Super Nintendo with Super Mario World, but of course had 2 appearances on the NES.
I believe I can name them. A game called Yoshi. And Yoshi's Cookie.
Yeah, that's right. So even though a beloved fixture of the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo was around, the NES was around for so long that he could also appear on the NES, not once but twice.
Yeah, kind of going along with your cross-generational thing, right? That like he is the poster child for the Super NES, but the NES is around for so much longer that they're like, oh, okay, I guess he can be in those games
Yeah.
too. Very good. My why is Yoshio Sakamoto. Obviously Sakamoto, we've been talking about a lot with the reveal of the new Famicom Detective Club game.
Woo!
Of which he is the like writer, producer, designer. He is also the original scenario designer for Metroid, and was making a bunch of cool games that took advantage of the storytelling capabilities of video games and the NES specifically, which were limited, of course, but kind of didn't stop him from like taking big weird swings. In the earlier days, he was the a designer on Balloon Fight, Gumshoe, and Wrecking Crew, so he's like kind of a staple of the early NES library. And it's not really until like 87, 88 that like Metroid and Famicom Detective Club start coming around. And in interviews with him about his work on like the later NES games, he saw his role as a complementary one to Miyamoto. That Miyamoto was all about gameplay experience and like executing something fun with as little context as necessary to like get you onto the next piece of fun. So Sakamoto said that his role was to come up with an idea that Miyamoto never would. And not that he was like in competition with him. It's almost the opposite, right? That he's like, I need to find the ideas that specific brand of genius doesn't touch. And that's where we get games like Famicom Detective Club and Metroid.
That's really cool.
It's a great piece of self-mythologizing on Sakamoto's part, but I love it. To be like, I fill in the void around the edges of the star that is Miyamoto. I buy it. I like it a lot.
That's really fun.
And then my Z, I wonder if we have the same one. It's the Zapper. Not quite a Nintendo Folly, but like another piece of peripheral hardware that only functions with a handful of games, including the Sakamoto designed Gumshoe, and Hogan's Alley, and of course famously Duck Hunt. And that's kind of it.
Yeah, Duck Hunt is the only one of those that we owned, and it was because we had I think it was called like the Action Pack is what my parents bought that came with the NES, that 3-in-1 cartridge that we talked about, the Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, and the World Class Track Meet, and then it came with the Power Pad and it came with the Zapper. So you had one game,
right?
And those were only.
Did it come with 2 NES controllers or just one? I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
It's just, if it came with 2, it's just wild to think of buying a new system and having 4 controllers in it.
Yeah,
of various kinds,
plus 3 games.
Yeah.
But really, it's like, it's
like 1 and 2 half games.
It's the only game we ever used the Zapper for.
Totally.
Like the Zapper was more a toy than it was like a video game controller for us. And then the Power Pad, yes, we played a little bit of World Class Track Meet, but for the most part, it was used as a cape or
or something
against
slippery
the couch
that you could skate on your socks
to make
on.
A cave. Like it was also more of a toy than a video game controller.
Kids really do make their own fun. No, but the Zapper was a great little light gun. It had just the one button on it, right? Like just the trigger. And it came in like 2 different flavors. One was like the gray. And then at some point they realized like, oh, that looks too much like a gun. Better make it in orange. And so that sort of became the Zapper standard going forward. We had the gray one.
We had the orange one.
Cool. They're both cool. I feel like they're both iconic.
Yeah, the shape of it feels like a sci-fi laser gun.
It does.
And then it has a very satisfying, the trigger is spring loaded and has a very satisfying like sound and feel when you pull the trigger. It
was really amazing the way the like sound effects in the game seem to like work in concert with the like click of the spring loaded gun, so that it like it felt like a big sound. Obviously not that loud, of course, but like it felt like a big like impactful
it was
sound when
satisfying
you pulled the
for
trigger.
sure.
And I know I mentioned this when we talked about how we would plus up NES games a couple weeks ago, but man, I would love it if there were a way to bring light gun games back and like play the NES. Because I did play a little bit of Hogan's Alley, but not a lot. I've never played Gumshoe. And I know that they're like available on like emulators and whatever, but it's all like, like clicking or who even knows.
Yeah.
And that's not how I want to play. I want to play with a cool light gun. Um, and yeah, that's on my like list of NES things that like if I could, is it worth it to me to like get a CRT TV and an NES and a Zapper and a handful of games just so I can do this because there's no other way to do it? I don't know. Maybe we may be driving towards that.
I also feel like we're on the cusp of a peripheral explosion. Every 20 years.
This is a good point.
Right? Like with the NES,
Mhm.
tons of peripherals.
Right.
Then it kind of lies fallow for a little bit. And then the Wii era, again, tons of peripherals.
Sure. Especially, thank you, Guitar Hero.
Yeah, Guitar Hero, Rock Band for sure. But then also like the stuff that got sold, the little like plastic accessories where you're like, well, like put this
Yeah, in a
the
tennis
head of a
racket.
tennis
Yeah.
racket. Yeah.
To say nothing of Wii Fit balance boards,
Uh-huh.
which are stuffed under every couch, I believe. I think if you buy a new couch now, it comes with a balance board under it.
But that was about 20 years ago.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think we're due. I think the era of the Zapper may return
All right.
sooner than we possibly think.
Well, I miss it, so I will welcome it back.
My Z, it's for Zelda.
Dun, 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 dun,
One
dun,
a game that, we've talked about before, I actually don't think is that fun to play, but foundational for sure. And laying the groundwork for one of Nintendo's key franchises.
Yeah. And like it just an important. I know you don't find it to be that much fun, but it's a game that I love, and I know that when I commit myself to like working my way through it and like using a guide when I have to, I do have a lot of fun actually playing.
I've got to say, as part of Nintendo World Championships NES Edition, they, take you through moments of that game. And for me, it's a great way to play because it's like a guided, curated experience. And so that part I have enjoyed.
It's also in Nintendo World Championships. Wild 2, the Master Challenge is doing the first dungeon, but because you don't have like any responsibilities to like get the item in the dungeon, you skip like most of it by just grabbing keys and like making a beeline to the that dragon thing and killing it. But yeah, it's that first dungeon is so like the first couple dungeons of that game and like the overworld map all feel iconic to me. But yeah, I mean mostly you're right that it is notable for being the foundation for the series that would come afterwards and forever and have most of the greatest games of all time in its lineup.
Well, just amazing that, when the biggest Zelda game of all time, Breath of the Wild, came out, the reason, like so much of what they did in that game was look back to the first game and what people liked about that and figure out how to bring it into the modern era. So to have a game that like captured the imagination that way back on the NES is really remarkable.
Yeah. Well, and especially when you compare it to something like, and I know it's not fair to drag out the corpses of Atari games here, but like you compare it to something like Adventure, and it's just leagues ahead of anything that was being done in like the overhead adventure game format. And that like it felt like quick and responsive. I think the game's faults are in how open the exploration is and like how unguided that is. But with just a little guidance, it becomes like a fully functional, borderline modern game. I don't know. It's the original Legend of Zelda is a good game. Also, Z could also be for Zelda 2. We don't know. The Adventure of Link. We don't have to talk about Zelda 2. All right, Mark, that was our A to Z, or rather our N through Z. Any other thoughts on the NES as we are wrapping up our sort of reflections on it here over the last 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean,
we're
truly
still in hot NES
we
summer.
are in hot NES summer. I wonder if they have anything in store for like the NES's big 4.0, which will be coming up in next year, right?
Yeah, 85.
85.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it seems like they're rolling out the red carpet right now.
I wonder if they're
Right?
trying to like split the difference between the Famicom's
That's a great
anniversary
point. Yeah.
and the NES's anniversary. But yeah, I mean, it's a milestone it's the reason why we're here today.
Yeah.
So
It does seem like we will never rid ourselves of the aesthetics of the NES, right? That's just like baked into, like Super Mario Odyssey or like the NES games being playable in like Animal Crossing or whatever. All of that kind of, it just feels like it's always going to be there.
I feel like it's baked into Nintendo's DNA to look back on its history.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it rewarding if you know are a fan since childhood.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because they love to dredge that stuff up.
All right. Well, Mark, let's close this out. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Thank you so much to our 16-bit patrons, Connor McCabe, Patrice Millette, Kyle Seaborn. We appreciate you. We appreciate everyone who is listening to the show or participating in the Patreon or hanging out in the Discord. It is super fun to do this and to interact with all of you. Join that Discord if you have not already. Email us and we will send you an invitation. Anthony DeLuca made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying thank you for listening.